Now I'm honored to invite our next speaker. It's Dr. Aviel, Avi D. Rubin. He's a professor of computer science and technical director of the Information Security Institute of Johns Hopkins University. He's also the director of the JHU Health and Medical Security Lab, the founder of Harbor Labs, a cybersecurity company, and he's also an author of several books about computer security. So welcome. Hi. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's really nice for me to be back at Tel Aviv University. In 2010, I did a sabbatical from my university, Johns Hopkins, here at Tel Aviv University. So I spent a year here as a visiting professor, and I got in yesterday, so I'm a little tired, but it's nice to be back. I want to tell you about just a couple words about my background and how I got here before I speak. So I have a lab at Johns Hopkins called the Medical Security Lab. And I started doing that work about 13 years ago when I was here at Tel Aviv University. And what we did is research into medical devices, looking at different attack vectors, different vulnerabilities, and then ways of dealing with them. I started the company Harbor Labs, which does medical device security. We help companies get through the FDA, which is the United States process for getting a device approved before you can put it into the marketplace. So I'm going to talk about some of those experiences. I see that there are three cybersecurity epics. One of them was the early days where hacking attacks basically had to do with breaking into a system and doing digital things like deleting all of the data or getting root on a computer. And it really didn't pose a threat to us as individual healthy people. It posed a threat to our information. The second epoch was the physical epoch. And this is where people started to use systems, and those systems were connected to real-world things like dams, power grid, etc. And the third cyber attack epoch is attacking people, directly attacking human beings. And that's what I'm going to be speaking about. Let's look at one of the second epochs, though. This was an attack. This was on the front page of the New York Times in February of 2021, right before the Super Bowl in the US. There's a chemical called sodium hydroxide, which is used in the water treatment facilities. And you're supposed to have 100 parts per million of this, and then it's safe and it's effective. Someone had changed a parameter in the system. Instead of 100 parts per million, 11,100 parts per million, or at least tried to change that parameter. And that would have resulted in many deaths. It would have poisoned the water in this area in Florida. And looking back at how this happened, there was a remote access credential that was shared among employees and shouldn't have been. There was a software package that was configured incorrectly. And so what an attacker was able to do is use remote access to actually physically log into the machine and change this parameter. Lucky for us and for the people in Florida, there was an employee looking at the computer when this attacker was doing that. And so actually saw the cursor moving, saw the selection happening, shut it down and said something's going wrong. And that's the only reason that was caught. So as we move to more and more physical systems, medical systems that interact with our own world, we face additional risks. So I want to talk about the era of smart medicine and what some of the specific devices are that are becoming more and more smart in that they have communication capabilities, and also we've heard AI mentioned a few times, smart in that way too. So the first one I'm going to look at, it's on the top left here. This is an infusion pump. How many of you are familiar with infusion pumps? Okay, see a few hands. So let me tell you what that is. This is a device that is designed to let you get medication at home. So you take this device and you connect the medication to it, and you actually connect it to a needle in your body, and it will dispense the medication. And this has been a game changer for people that used to have to go into hospitals to get treatment all the time. Now they can do it at home. Well, these things initially were just these devices that were in your house and did this, but then of course we made them smart. So that would allow the doctor to remotely log into the device and check the dosage. Say, is the patient getting the right amount of dosage? Look at the logs and say, is this device operating properly, etc. Well, of course, if you open up the device to remote access, think about the security threats. If the doctor is able to actually change your dosage, let's say you call your doctor, say, I'm having a side effect from this medication. The doctor's like, okay, I'm going to pull back on this particular one. Imagine what a hacker could do if somebody without authorization gets into that device. Next, we're going to look in the middle picture here. We see an MRI. And an MRI machine allows you, obviously, to get very detailed look inside of the body. And one of the problems with allowing remote access, these things have become smart because it allows a doctor to get the images on a mobile device, or if you go to another hospital, they can access your MRI directly. But imagine if an attacker were able, for example, to change the radiation dosage in the machine or some other parameter. So as we introduce these medical advances, which are great for people, we also have to think about what are the cybersecurity implications. Let's look at the next one. Here we see a surgical robot in use. Surgical robotics is really taking off. There's a big lab at Johns Hopkins where I work. If you come in, you can see a glass wall behind it. You see the robot. Imagine areas in places like Africa where they don't have as much technology, they don't have as many doctors. You can connect a patient to a surgical robot and have a doctor in Baltimore, Maryland, performing a surgical procedure. And this is already happening. The other thing that it lets you do is get very fine control access. So I was able to play around with the robot and take a little hair and a tiny little needle and thread the needle in a way that I never could do with my own hands. Because of the way the controls are designed, it takes all the jitter out. So all of us, some of our hands shake a lot, some of them shake a little, but all of us have some jitter, and these surgical robots can be designed to take that away and give the doctor really, really good control. But if you think of the doctor in Baltimore performing surgery on the patient in Africa, this is all happening via internet communication. And so if you think of the cyber threats of a patient who's lying open on a surgical table with knives and threads and other things there, you can start to imagine why security people might be nervous about this. The next one I have here in the bottom left is a dialysis machine. Dialysis is for people with diabetes, and this is a machine that's going to process the blood that's in your body. And so, again, the more smart it is, the more risk it has to actual human beings. And I've got a couple more. This is a glucose monitor, which would penetrate the skin and allow someone to get insulin injections. And if this connection is happening over Bluetooth, Bluetooth has various security considerations. And finally, we have a defibrillator. This is a device that goes implanted surgically into the patient and helps control the heart's rhythm. And it's controlled with an app on your phone. And so if you're walking around with this thing inside you and you can control from your app, you might think about very carefully about the cybersecurity threats. So I want to look at just one of the devices that I showed you, which is the surgical robot system. And what is the attack surface? Like, where would there be possible vulnerabilities? One of them would be a smart device, which is going to be part of the system, a control application, a local server where information is stored. Every one of these has to interact with the surgical system, and it's going to do it over IP. An EHR system where medical records get updated. Third-party peripherals like the cameras so that the surgeon can see what's happening remotely. Any vulnerability in the software on that camera might give an attacker a foothold into the system. A cloud system as well, and then other medical devices within the hospital or within the environment that the surgery is happening where there might be a concern. And so you see, it's not a simple task to try to secure a medical device like this because the attackers only need to get into the weakest link. So any one of these systems here that has a vulnerability could allow the attacker to do something very serious to the robotic system. One of the techniques that we use when we're modeling a device like that and we try to come up with the security is an attack tree. The idea behind an attack tree is that we want to model all the different points where an attacker could do something. So whether it's physical access, remote access, through the one-time password authentication system, a touchpad, etc. When you build out your attack tree, you start to get a sense of the complexity of your device and then figure out where you need to concentrate your security resources. I don't need to convince the people here, because you guys came to this, that personal health information security is a high-value target for attackers. You can see my list here. The one I'll point out is pivot point, which is often overlooked, which is, let's say you have a device in your environment and you do a really good job of securing your medical device from remote threats, but you have another device in there that isn't secure, or that somebody figures out how to penetrate, and that device is no longer carrying out a remote threat to your device. It's now with your device, and so that can be a pivot point into your network. The attacker can do all kinds of things, from forging patient data, changing patient dosages, altering therapeutic functions. All of this could pretty much give everybody nightmares. And I heard somebody say that root access on a medical system is equivalent to getting root on the patient. You can do to the patient whatever you want. So I'm going to move ahead into talking about the FDA. The FDA serves as a gatekeeper in the US to allowing medical devices to be sold and used. And I want to show you two very brief, quick case studies. One of them is a wearable insulin pump, and the regulations of them are, for example, you have a personal mobile device. The device talks to the insulin pump itself, and the pump gets configured using the patient's mobile device. However, the pump is supposed to talk to a back-end cloud system, and it will share sensitive medical information. So one of the regulations says that while you can control the pump through your personal medical device, the personal medical device should not be trusted to see the medical data. And so you have to have an end-to-end secure communication between the personal medical pump and the back-end system. And if you think about that, so when a manufacturer now has to conform with these regulations, they have to look at, what am I doing? What's my app going to do on my phone? And what is the pump going to do? And while I am going to configure the pump from the app, there's certain control I don't have over the device from the app, because I'm not allowed to be able to see the medical data. So you have a secure authenticated connection that's limited in functionality between the mobile device and the pump, and then the mobile device acts as a conduit of protected data that it can't see going back to the cloud service provider. So one of the things that we do in my company is a manufacturer of something like this comes to us, shows us their protocols, and we see, you're not conforming with the regulations, you're never going to get FDA approval. Here's how you need to do that, and here's how you want to do that to make this more secure. Okay, so let me move ahead for time reasons and talk about the second case study. I think I'm getting close to my time, so I'll make this very brief. I'm good? Okay. So early generations of medical devices, you had a single set of access credentials. You would allow people to telnet or FTP directly into the device and change parameters. There was a USB port that could be used to maintain and configure the device. And you could get direct access to a device and a keyboard. Now, if we're looking at an infusion pump, there were a lot of headlines maybe about 10 years ago when infusion pumps started to come online saying there are all these huge security problems with infusion pumps because you could just FTP to a device with no password, because the idea was really it's just a doctor is taking care of this. And you had these systems that were not designed to be protected, and they're just put on the internet all of a sudden. And so that's where we found all of these press stories about problems with these infusion pumps. In the earlier generations, there were no concept of users. You just had a pump. And you had this unauthenticated USB port and a direct link to remote access vulnerabilities. The last point here is really serious one, which is if you had a problem with the device while you're in maintenance mode, the clinical operations could be affected by that. So the newer generations, in order to improve security, what they did is created accounts, just like you have in a Unix system with SSH, HTTPS, etc., access to it, remove all the insecure services. If you have physical access to the device, you'd still have to have a PIN number. And then the big transformation was to separate out the clinical functions of the device from the maintenance functions of the device. So you could have a login that would allow you to maintain the device, to upgrade the software to an authenticated new firmware, but there was no way remotely to change a dosage or to do anything that would actually clinically impact the patient. And clinical mode was disabled whenever the device would go into maintenance mode. And that provided better security. And so this is the regulation that the FDA has come in with, saying that your medical devices have to do all of these things. So medical devices are becoming more complex. They're becoming smart. And the biggest problem is perhaps that medical devices that were designed to work in a hospital suddenly are being moved into people's homes, put on the internet, and managed remotely. And so security has to keep up with that. We do have a situation where more and more people are being trained in cybersecurity, and I think that cybersecurity in the US, at least, in medical devices is actually improving and getting better, and that's because the FDA has taken charge and has hired people like Kevin Fu, professor out of Michigan, who really understand security to be in charge of the approval of devices. And so the last thing I want to say is that medical devices are designed typically by people with a medical background, as they should be. But it's important for us, and I assume in this room we have mostly people on the IT side, to be part of the process of building these devices to make them secure. And that is it. Thank you very much.